All right. So I am Pastor Peter, and when we get together every Sunday, we always take some time to be in the Bible because we believe that God speaks to us today, and He speaks to us about who Jesus is in the Bible. I'm going to we're doing this a little bit different. Can I get, Jackson, would you be willing to run slides for us? So the last week, if you were with us, you'll remember that we kind of introduced to these two guys, Joseph and Judah. They're brothers from way back when, ancient Palestine area, ancient Middle East. And you can find their stories at the end of the book of Genesis. Looking at last week, we saw the life of Joseph, and it's this roller coaster of a life filled with lots of pain, but then a lot of integrity. And God definitely blessed his life and worked through him this rescue mission, which looks a lot like what Jesus did for us, where he was rejected, but then in the end, he saved the very people who rejected him. And so we got to see Joseph and follow his story. This week, we're looking at the story of Judah, and a lot of the same events, but from the opposite side, and how Judah played a part in this story. Before we do that, though, I was thinking, why does it matter? Why pay attention to Joseph and Judah's stories from way back when? And yeah, they're in the Bible, and so that's a good reason to pay attention. But on top of that, I think you can make an argument for the fact that their stories matter because our world is crazy. So, watching the news and stuff, right? Like you see aggression in Eastern Europe, that's everywhere. On my Google News feed, I had another impeachment threat, so they get more impeachment threats. Nobody trusts politicians, right? Nobody trusts that, right? It's just sort of this crazy world we live in. And then stepping outside of that, maybe slightly closer to decisions and conversations that we have to have about our lives, our culture asks us to define what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? And all of the a lot of traditional definitions are thrown out the window, and so you have to rediscover and redefine and recreate that, and that gets kind of crazy. So even thinking, I was in a conversation with a friend this week, and we were talking about how we both do this thing where we will spend hours and hours and hours on our phones looking up the new next tantalizing thing. Like maybe it's a phone. Like, I'm using my phone to look for another phone, and then I'm all caught up in this, and it's so exciting, and it draws me back in, and then, Google sends me articles about other phones that I could look at too, because they know I'm doing that. And so then it's so exciting, and I spend so much time doing this, and then I finally make a decision to buy the phone, and I get it, and it doesn't satisfy, right? And it's like, oh, well, this is actually the same thing as what I had before. It does all the same stuff, and my life is no different. And so it's like more exciting to not have the thing and dream about the thing than it is to actually have the thing. And that's a little weird. That's like a little odd, I think. Or even with family stuff, right? I've spent years thinking about how much I want to have the people around me and belong to the people around me, and I want to have people around me who love me and that I love and all that stuff, right? And I draw all these people in only to, once I have that, to then spend all my time thinking about how I can get away from them. Like, how can I get out of the house? How can I put distance between me and my friends? And how can I just have some alone time, right? That's crazy. We want, and then we push away, and the world just feels like that picture from elementary school. Remember, the world is on an axis, but the axis isn't straight up and down. It's crooked. And north isn't actually north. It's a little off to the center. And it just feels like the whole world is a little twisted and a little crazy. And I think that's why Joseph and Judah's stories matter. Because their great-grandfather, Abraham, met the guy who was managing this crazy world. He met God, and God shows up and makes a promise to Abraham, and he says to him in Genesis 12:3 that I'm going to bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Now that's actually fairly cryptic, right? It doesn't say what that blessing is. It doesn't say how the entire world, us included, are going to be blessed by this family. But Joseph and Judah's family nonetheless has this promise that's being passed on from one generation to the next, that somehow through them God is going to bless everybody else. Spoilers, the blessing is God showing up again, but not to visit the family, to enter the family. He shows up as a way later on descendant of this family, and he comes to put the world back on track, to fix its spinning off center, to like remove the crazy, the bad kind of crazy. I think that there'll still be good crazy down the road, but that's me. The point being, we are reading about Joseph and Judah not simply because there's incredible stories there for us to learn about what it means to be human, to learn great moral examples and stuff like that in Joseph or in Judah. We're reading about them apart from any other family because they're connected to this promise, because they're connected to this blessing that impacts our crazy world. The way that God is fixing our crazy world. Joseph and Judah are caught up in that. They play a part in that. Their family is integral to that plan. And if God's plan is to send one day his son to enter this family and be a part of this family, then every generation from Abraham, their great-grandfather, Joseph and Judah's great-grandfather, all the way down through to Jesus, is asking this question, which son in our generation carries the promise? That's kind of just how genealogies work. That's how family lines work. You have to trace it through people and specific people within the family. And so this promise given to the family is tracing on through generations to get to Jesus. It's a big honor to be the chosen child, the child of promise, the one who carries that. And for their great-grandfather Abraham, that was an easy choice. He only had one legitimate son, so he gets to be the child of promise. And then when he had his family, their grandfather had two boys, right? And those two boys, the choice was one or the other, and surprisingly, the younger one was chosen. Like, you would think it would have been the older one. And that younger boy ended up being Joseph and Judah's dad, and Jacob, as the father here, has 12 different sons. And the question is, which son is the son of promise? Which son is the one that's going to be caught up in this big plan that God has to rescue the world and to make the crazy fixed and right and whole and good? Which son is he going to enter into that family line? And it's Judah. I was thinking about maintaining the tension, but I think that a lot of us know it's Judah, so I didn't have any tension to maintain. But also because there's a better question for her to ask than simply, which son is it? I think the better question is, why is it Judah? Of all the sons that could have been chosen, there's 12 different boys in this family. Joseph is in this family. And we watched, if you were here last week, Joseph's amazing. He is honorable, he is noble, he does the right thing, he's filled with integrity. Why not Joseph? Why Judah? So we're going to look at 3 snapshots in Judah's life. And that's kind of the plan for the day. We look at 3 snapshots of Judah's story. And as we're doing that, the question in the back of our minds is, so what about Judah puts him to the surface and gives him the promise? Why is he chosen? Snapshot 1 is in Genesis 37. Backstory to Judah and his family. The family is really dysfunctional. There's sisters that got married to the same guy, so there's a lot of family drama there. There is, there's these baby wars that have gone on because the culture believes that the only value a woman has is the kids that she brings into the family, and that's wrong, but that is the way the culture worked. And so these 2 women, sisters, are fighting over value. They're fighting over the affection and their place in the family. They want their husband's love, and they think it's all equated to having sons, and they start going at it and trying to have more kids than the other one, and that's dysfunctional. That's using your kids for your own validation. That's no good. And it's trying to get love from somebody else that, through this sort of method or whatever, and it doesn't work. Because Jacob has already decided which one he loves, and it's Rachel. Rachel has 2 kids, Joseph and Benjamin, and so Joseph and Benjamin get the lion's share of their dad's love. Judah is born to the unwanted Leah. And Judah lives in this family growing up. He watches his mom come back to this abusive relationship over and over and over again, trying to get love from a man who will not give it to her, and consistently over and over and over again says, your sister is better than you. Judah watches that, and he lives in that. And then he gets to experience it himself when his dad turns to his brother and says, "You are better than Judah. I love you more than I love Judah." And there's a lot of angst. That's a lot of hurt, and that's a lot of pain that builds up over time. And it isn't helped by the fact that they all work together in the family business. And Joseph, the younger brother, is put in charge of all of his older siblings. That's got to hurt. And so like you look at this moment, and it's building tension till you get to Genesis 37, and the boys are out working, and Joseph comes to check in on them, and it's a tipping point, and the boys start talking about, how can we kill our brother Joseph? And Judah's right in the mix of that conversation with all the anger and all the angst and all the frustration. There's one sane voice. The oldest, Reuben, is like, guys, we don't really want to kill our brother. Calm down. Let's think about this for a second. Let's rough him up, toss him in a pit. It's the sanest voice in the mix. So they do that. They follow through on that, but Judah's not ready to let go of this moment. He's worked up, and over lunch, they're having this conversation, and in Genesis 37:26, our snapshot kind of opens up. Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let not our hand be on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. So this is Judah. And the biographer is like, I want you to see this clearly. Joseph is our protagonist. He's the hero. Judah is the antagonist. He's the villain. We don't know who it was who came up with the idea to try to kill Joseph. He glosses over that fact and focuses in instead on the role that Judah played, on the idea that Judah presented, which was, let's sell our brother into slavery. And I think we can ask the question, what's driving Judah? Now, on one hand, we've already covered that, right? Like, there's a lot of angst, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of in-family fighting and all that. There's a lot of rejection. But the text also gives us two other things that motivate this particular action. And the first one is that he asks, what profit is it to kill our brother? He brings money into the equation in this moment of passion and vengeance and like we're ready to kill our brother. He's like, also, we could make some money on this. And I think it really matters how you slice it. Bringing money into the equation makes Judah even worse. Profiting off of killing his brother or selling his brother, like bringing profit into this moment of revenge paints Judah in an even worse light. He's not the guy who's like throwing the money to the side and saying, no, I'm after the justice of everything that happened to me happening to you. All the rejection of me happening to you. He doesn't throw the money aside. He actually perks up. He's like, and there's a way to make $1. Judah isn't looking great here. He's acting selfishly. And maybe you could construe it and say, maybe he's so mad with Joseph that he's just grasping at straws to convince his brothers to act. How can I make sure that we get rid of Joseph altogether? And money, we could even get money in doing this. He doesn't want to lose the opportunity. I don't know. But again, no matter how you slice it, the money paints Judah that much worse. He's willing to equate dollar signs with his brother's future and life. And yeah. The second motivation, though, that you see here is in this phrase, let not our hand be on him, for he is our brother. And I think what Judah's doing here is he's running after the moral high ground. He's saying, there's a line that even I won't cross. I mean, I might kill somebody, but I wouldn't kill my brother. I might sell him into slavery and doom him to being owned forever by another person, but I wouldn't kill him. I'm still a decent guy after all. And it's kind of insane. Like, in that moment where he's deciding to engage in human trafficking with his family, he's like, but I'm not going to cross that line. I think his morality is kind of twisted. And it's worth noticing because I think we do stuff like that. And maybe it doesn't get that dramatic. but nobody wants to see themselves as the bad guy or as the antagonist or as the villain of the story. And so we rationalize things. We say, well, I may have crossed this line, but I haven't crossed that line. And I might be in this amount of trouble, but I'm not willing to get into that amount of trouble. So slavery looks like a better option than murder. And that's the moral balance that Judah wants to strike. We haven't talked about this before, but Judah's family history has loads of moments, not loads, that's overstating it, several different moments already. We're only on the first, second, third or fourth generation, and there's already multiple stories in their family of people almost murdering somebody, but then at the last second pulling it short. Almost murdering somebody, but then at the last second, and within the family, but then at the last second bailing. Or at the last second, divine hand coming in and being like, no, don't do this. His great-grandmother tried to get his great-uncle killed. His dad was almost put to death by his uncle. And in both of the situations, God shows up and does something different so that the murder doesn't follow through. And as Judah's in this moment, I kind of wonder if he's aware or if he's processing just this family pattern and being like, I don't want to be the guy who breaks type and actually goes the whole way and ends up killing my brother. Like, I'm not willing to take us that far. Or maybe another way to look at it is, like, even here in this moment, God's not willing, God's protecting this family. And in all the ways that they keep cycling through this pattern of trying to kill because of the anger and aggression and dysfunction within the family, God keeps stopping it short. Taking it back one more level, Judah, he grew up with the same sort of stories that any family does. We tell Bible stories to our kids if you're raising in the family, right? And so Judah doesn't have a Bible in front of him, but he does have the stories of what God has done up to this point, which would include when God created the world of the first family and the tension in the first family. And he grew up on hearing the story of two brothers, an older brother and a younger brother. And the older brother did not get the affirmation and acceptance that the younger brother did. And out of that anger, he killed his younger brother. And the result was that God saw that. And the blood cried out from the ground saying, what had happened, and God steps in and he curses the older brother. He says, this blood guilt is going to be on your head for the rest of your life. And even though there's a blessing or like a protection element to what God does with the older brother, that older brother lives the rest of his life separated from his family and unable to work in the way that he used to be able to work because of the curse on the ground. And Judah sees himself all of a sudden in this moment, and maybe that Bible story comes to mind. And he's like, do I really want to bring a curse down on my head by harming my brother? God, do I want his blood crying out from the ground, condemning me? Do I want to carry the blood guilt? Do I want to carry the curse? No, I don't. I want to protect myself from that. I want a certain amount of moral integrity. I want a certain amount of protection in this. And so let's sell him, make some money on it, and move on with our lives. And that's snapshot one. That's Judah. Their stories separate from there. Joseph goes off into Egypt, but the biographer actually hangs out for a second longer with Judah. In chapter 38 of Genesis, we get to follow Judah's story over the next several years. He goes back home, and immediately we're told that he starts to try to set up his own family. He has a friend named Hira, and they head off to a new city together to start a business. They're working the jobs, and Judah meets a girl. So fall in love, have a family, do that whole thing, and it almost feels like you're setting up for this turn towards stability in Judah's life. He has 3 boys, and as the oldest one gets to that point where he's ready to get married, Judah works along with him and finds a wife for his oldest son named Tamar. There's a custom in the day that, I'm getting ahead of myself. He finds this person named Tamar. Now, to see this moment, I want to put a caveat out there. You can't judge a parent by the actions of their children, right? Like, that's not fair to do. We do our best as parents to invest in our kids, but then ultimately each person is responsible for their own actions. And yet the biographer does make a point of describing the way that Judah's boys turned out. Both of them are so evil that they get put to death by God. It doesn't paint Judah as this great new patriarch of his family, as this admirable new, like he's homesteading and he's doing his new thing and he's, like doing his best to raise his kids. But instead, his kids are being put to death because of how evil they are. And if you double tap into that moment, the oldest son, who's married to Tamar, dies before he has any kids. So the culture of the day, which, remember, equates women with the kids that they have and the value of the family line continuing, and that's not right, but it is the culture. So the custom of the day is if a husband dies with no kids, no sons, then his brother is supposed to step in and take his wife and give him a son so that the family line can continue. Okay. So Judah follows this custom for his family. He takes his second oldest, gives him to Tamar. They try to have some kids together, but the second son is selfish. The second son could care less about his brother, could care less about the family, could care less about all those things, and is sort of in it for himself, and so he refuses to do what needs to be done in order to give her a kid. And God sees this as evil and also takes his life. So just think for a second about who Judah is right now, what Judah's life is right now. 2 sons, both dead. He has a daughter-in-law who's still in the family, and as far as he can tell, every boy she touches of his dies. How does he process that? In Genesis 38:11, here's what he does. Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up." So that's the third born. For he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and she remained in her father's house. A little bit more time goes on, and not only does he lose both sons, but he loses his wife. His life is being tracked with this death over and over and over again. And Tamar notices that Shelah is plenty old enough to be her husband. And like Leah, she equates her value with having sons. And she's been given this death sentence to live forever as a widow in this guy's house. And he's not sharing the son, and so she decides to take things into her own hands. The story goes kind of R-rated, and we have to deal with what happens next. She dresses up like a prostitute, and she goes out and she lays a trap for Judah. I don't know why she targeted Judah, but she did. And she knows him well enough to know that he will take her up if she dresses up as a prostitute, that he will respond to that. Doesn't paint Judah in a great light. And it turns out that she's right. He does respond. He does reach out. He does sleep with her. And in payment for sleeping with her, he doesn't have any money on him, so he gives away his signet ring and these items that identify him and that he probably should be treating with a little bit more respect, let alone the fact that he's not treating this person with respect. But he doesn't value that. He doesn't value the people. And again, he's engaging in money for people the second time. After sleeping together, Judah goes off to work, and she books it back home. She gets home, nobody knows what happened until 3 months go by. About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality." And Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, "By the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant." And she said, "Please identify whose these are, the signet, the cord, and the staff." And then Judah identified them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not know her again." It's kind of hard to talk about this story. I was trying to think of, where do you go? It just is so strange. It's so weird. It's so dark. You have Judah finding out that his daughter-in-law has essentially kind of sinned against the family. That's what he first sees. She's brought dishonor on the family. And he's on this moral high horse again. And he's like, "How dare you bring dishonor on my family, put her to death." And what we have ringing in the back of our ears is, you sold your brother into slavery, Judah. What are you talking about? Dishonor on your family. And what we know that he doesn't know is he's as engaged in this as she is. And so when the ball drops and she reveals secretly to him, I don't think it's this type of thing where she outs him to everybody. When she shows him who it is and he realizes what's happened, his world crashes around him. All of that pretense that he has about being like the new noble head of a family, about trying to like live this new life, and to run his family well, and to maintain his moral integrity and see himself as not just the bad guy in the story or whatever, it just doesn't work anymore. And he agrees with the way that we've been reading him all along and says, I am not a righteous person. He says his daughter is more righteous than he is, and she seduced her father-in-law so that she could get a value and validate herself through a baby. I mean, that's not a great level of righteousness. And he's saying, I'm worse. I think we would all agree. He is. From any way you slice it, from any way you look at it, from any angle you take, he's a train wreck of a human. And that's snapshot 2. All right, maybe 3 turns it around. Snapshot 3 plays out over a couple different chapters in Genesis 42 through 44. And to get there, we just have to remember a little bit of what happened to Joseph. Joseph went to Egypt. Joseph was blessed by God there. He lived a life of integrity. God brought him to this place where he was advising the Pharaoh, which is insane. He was a slave, but now he's advising the Pharaoh. And God uses him to protect all of Egypt from this upcoming famine so that they have resources and supplies to get through it. Judah and the rest of his brothers and his family, they don't know anything about that. As far as they know, their brother is gone. But when the famine hits, family meeting sets in, and the boys are sent down to go collect resources from Egypt because, rumors say that they still have stockpiles. Most of the family is sent. Jacob still is doing his whole favoritism thing, and he's like, except for Benjamin. Benjamin stays back with me because he's my favorite, and you guys, in not so many words, aren't. This guy. Anyway, so the boys go down to Egypt. They get there. Joseph immediately recognizes them, but they have no reason to recognize Joseph, and so they don't. And Joseph is like, how do I act right now? And he chooses to test them. He chooses to provide for them in the ways that they need it, but then also to test them. And so he accuses them of being spies. He arrests one of the brothers and says, go back home with all the supplies that you need, but if you want more, you're going to need to come back to rescue your brother. You're going to need to come back with your youngest brother. I think he might be working an angle because he misses Benjamin too. Who knows? When Judah and the brothers get back home, they have to tell their dad that once again he's lost a son. And he's brokenhearted. He's angry. And they also have to tell him the only way for us to get food and survive whatever comes next, if we're ever going to go back down to Egypt, we're going to have to take Benjamin with us. He's like, I'm not entrusting another boy to you guys, let alone Benjamin. And Reuben steps up. You remember Reuben, the oldest, the only sane voice in the first snapshot? Reuben's like, Dad, I got this. I will take care of him. I promise I will return him. And you can have my 2 boys in collateral. And it's like, really, Reuben? This family. Yikes. The dad doesn't take him up on that. But a little bit more time goes on, and they're starting to run out of food, and they don't have options. And so they come back, family meeting again. And they have to decide what they're going to do. And this time, not Reuben, but Judah speaks, and we get to see his offer. He says, send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. This doesn't feel like the guy from our first 2 stories, does it? This guy is saying something fairly noble, fairly selfless. He's acting with a certain amount of character here. And he says, I will be responsible for your son, my half-brother, Benjamin. You will, my life on the line. And I got to think that he sort of glares a little bit at Reuben when he says, we're doing this for our little ones. He doesn't put his kids up as collateral. He says, no, this family is something that we need to act to protect. From the dad, who is really messed up, to us brothers, we've got our own mistakes, to the little ones around us. And he gets a chance to, follow through on his promise. The dad takes him up on it, sends the boys off again, this time with Benjamin, and they get to Egypt. When they get there, Joseph remains sort of in disguise, if you will, and he welcomes them in, has a big meal with them, and then sends them out. And I think everybody's breathing a sigh of relief once they get out of Egypt with all the supplies that they need, until they see the dust cloud of the rider approaching behind them. And the servant from this crazy Egyptian ruler says, you guys stole from my master. How dare you disrespect his hospitality? And then that shock turns into grief and pain when Benjamin, of all people, opens his supplies, and there are the stolen items. Now, in this moment, what is Judah thinking? What are the other brothers thinking? Of course it was Benjamin. Spoiled, silver platter, everything on a silver platter, Benjamin. Benjamin saying, I had nothing to do with this. I don't know how they got there. But they all, shoulders slumped, turn around and head back to Egypt, processing, what are we going to do when we get back? And Judah's trying to think through, what do we do here? And when they get to Joseph's house, Joseph, again, still hidden, is like, how dare you steal from me? Knowing that actually what happened was he put the stuff in the supplies because he's testing them. And Judah says, we got nothing to say, but he's trying to keep the family together, so he's like, take all of us as your servants. We'll stay together, figure this out, we'll be your servants. And Joseph says that wouldn't be just, which I think is kind of interesting. Joseph says that would be not a just exchange. I only need one life for this sin, for this breach of faith, for this action, and it should be the one who did it, Benjamin. And so Judah steps up and he's kind of like, please don't be angry with me, but let me share some context with you, sir. This son is the one that my father loves, and his brother's gone, and I think it will kill my dad if this son doesn't go back home. Please don't make us have to lose another one of these boys. And then he asks if Joseph would be willing to make this exchange. He says, please let your servant remain instead of the boy, as a servant to my Lord. Let the boy go back with his brothers, for how could I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father. So we'll talk about the significance of the statement, but I just, for the sake of pathos, for the sake of thinking through what Judah just said emotionally, he just admitted, my dad would die if Benjamin doesn't make it home. My dad will get over it if I don't. Right? He said, my loss is acceptable in the family. I know my dad. It is not, it'll kill him if he loses Benjamin. And because of that, that's his logic. He said, because of that, I want to protect my dad. I want him to live, even though it's not returned love. I want to protect Benjamin right now. I want him to live and be restored to my dad, even though his greedy stupidity got us into this mess. And this is Judah's final decision. He asks, please consider this exchange. He says, I want to take the place of this sinner. I want to pay his payment. I want his judgment to land on me. And the judge presiding over it all, Joseph, breaks down emotionally and says, it's me, guys. And there's this incredible happy ending as he realizes that Judah has changed. Judah has returned to the decision at the whole beginning of the story, where he had a brother who was absolutely loved by his father, and he had the option of sending him into slavery or, doing the right thing and keeping the family together. And where there, he sent him off into slavery selfishly. Here now, he has taken the brother that is loved by his father and represents all of the lack of love that he receives, and he's chosen not to act selfishly, but he's chosen instead to act to keep the family together, to love his father and to love his brother. It's a complete flip. And generations later, there's going to be another man who asks to make the same exchange. Jesus is going to come on behalf of all of his siblings, all of his spiritual family, and he's going to say, please take my life in exchange for their judgment, in exchange for what they've racked up against you in their sins and in their failures, in their rebellions, in all the crazy that they've perpetuated in their life, all the evil and dark, whatever that is, all that shame and guilt and stuff that they know is on their shoulders. I will take their place so that I get death and they get life, so that they can be restored back to their father, just like Judah does for Benjamin. In Titus 2, the Apostle Paul says about Jesus that the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people. Our great God and Savior Jesus Christ gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to purify for himself a people for his own possession who are zealous for good works. Talking about the promise that's given to this family, this family of Joseph and Judah, that somehow God's going to bless and heal the world. The prophet Isaiah says that he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors. The way that Jesus fixes the crazy world is by stepping into it and then exchanging the judgment of death for his life and righteousness. And he takes the brokenness, and he takes the evil, and he takes all that, and he exchanges his place in the family with us. Judah is doing that just on a much smaller scale. He's doing that for his brother and for his immediate family. Jesus just does it for the whole world. And he doesn't do it in the courtroom of Joseph and of Egypt, but he does it in the courtroom of God. So in Judah's story, we see this incredible, crystal clear picture of the way that Jesus plans to save his people. It's surprising that Judah's the one to show us it. So if we can circle back to our question at the beginning, why was Judah, rather than Joseph, chosen to carry the family promise? And my knee-jerk, I think when I first started studying this, the way that I was thinking about it was it's because of this moment. Because in Judah, you have this perfect picture of substitution, that Jesus will be our substitute one day. And because Judah has this perfect picture of substitution in it, God wants to double tap on that and draw our attention and say, this is my guy. This is how I'm going to rescue my people one day, many years later. But I was looking at it, and I don't think that that's actually a very full picture of the reason why Judah was chosen. Because the son of promise that, every generation has to have a son of promise, right, to get to Jesus eventually, from the promise in Abraham on down. Judah is the son for his generation, but that means one of his sons has to be the son of promise for the next generation. And the son from Judah that carries the promise forward is the boy born to his ancestral relationship with Tamar, who will one day become the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of Jesus. In the middle of his mess, Judah was chosen. Smack dab in the strangest moment in his life, Judah was chosen. I think the reason Judah was chosen over Joseph is because God did not want the story to be overcome and you will be chosen by God. Be good and you will be chosen by God. Be integrous and righteous. Be worthy of something beyond this world and you will be chosen by God. Judah's opposite of that. In the middle of the worst stories in the Bible, God chooses a family. And he gathers these people, the Judahs, people like me, with my mess and with my embittered heart, and he says, I came for you, not to hold you at a distance and like plug my nose because you reek. I came for you with open arms and saying, be my brother, be my family. I was born from people like you. That's why Judah's chosen. Because nobody is left out. And so thinking about that, when I think about what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus, what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus, what does it mean to help other people follow Jesus and be disciples of Jesus, the thing that I think of is first, like, thinking, I guess, about myself. Do I ever get stuck defining myself by my past or my present darkness and evil? And I do. I absolutely have a list of things that prove to me that I'm not good enough to be a follower of Jesus. That I am not, like I shouldn't be up here. I shouldn't really even be sitting in the pews. I don't belong. Whether it be as silly and simple as like screen time that I do not manage, right? Or whether it be like the moments and the memories where I was stuck in destructive behavior that wasn't even destructive just for me. And I didn't get out of it until other people stepped in because I was just going to keep doing it. And other people came in and had to stop me. Those moments play. I'm Judah more than I'm Joseph. Which means Judah's story can speak to me in a way that Joseph's story can't. Judah's story, in those moments when I'm playing my list out in my head, can remind me that I'm not chosen because I was good. I'm not Jesus' family because I look like him. I'm not Jesus' follower because he knew that I was really good at hospitality. I'm Jesus' family because he substituted in for me. I'm Jesus' family because he saw me, knew all of my stuff, and loved me. And you see this story play out over and over again in the Bible. It's the same thing that Jesus does when he gathers his disciples. He has the option of looking at the Joseph in the story, this guy named Nicodemus, religious leader, elite, loves God, loves the Word, great disciple material. And he has a conversation with him, but then he turns and picks Matthew. Matthew is a betrayer of his people. He's an extortionist. And Jesus, in the middle of him extorting people, is like, come follow me. Jesus over and over again tells us to be a disciple is to receive Jesus' substitute for your sins and your junk and your mess, and to receive Jesus' place in the family of God. And so I get to tell myself that when I'm trying to follow Jesus and my list pops up. I get to remember that when the shame and the guilt start running their script for who I actually am. But if I'm going to do that with myself, then that means I also probably should think about extending that to others. And so the question that I have here, I guess, is, have I made room in my life to disciple and to love Judahs? Josephs are easier to disciple. Josephs are easier to welcome into your life and say, hey, why don't you come with me? Let's go hard after God. Because they're already going hard after God. They're already willing to say, God's in the middle of my life and he's got me on, I don't understand it, but he's definitely taking me somewhere. And you know what? I'm willing to let my life be used by God however God chooses. Josephs say stuff like that and do stuff like that. Judahs don't. But Jesus said his family was made up of Judah, as well as Joseph's. It's not wrong to be a Joseph, insofar as it goes, I guess. But how am I going to respond when somebody brings their snapshot 1 or snapshot 2 life to me and opens up and says, this messy thing just happened this last week and I don't know what to do now? Do I have the bandwidth for that? Do I get uncomfortable and uneasy and then try to hold that at a distance? I probably do, actually. But Jesus doesn't. And then Jesus comes to me and says, I want you to come. Be like me. Let's work on having more bandwidth, having more space, having more willingness to love the people who are messy. Joseph and Judah are two brothers from centuries ago. And their lives were caught up in this rescue mission of God. Both of them had parts to play. Both of them, in the end, have stories that point to Jesus. What would it look like if we let our lives be used that way too? If we used our lives to be pointers to Jesus, whether it be through our Joseph-type moments or whether it be acknowledging our Judah-type tendencies. I think that's the call when we say we are here to be disciples of Jesus and to make disciples of Jesus. You guys pray with me?